Anyone who's been watching this channel for a while knows that I don't own a real Shelby Cobra. I actually have a replica that I built, and it was designed by Factory 5 Racing. I learned a lot of things building this car, most notably that the Cobra truly is the perfect mix of performance and driver experience, and it's pretty difficult to improve on Shelby's original formula. However, when it comes to the internal combustion engine, choosing a modern V8 is really a no-brainer if your goal is to make more power and have a reliable powertrain package. And when I built my Cobra, that was always my plan. Get the car licensed and running with the junkyard motor and replace it with the modern V8 at some point in the future. Well, in the time since, I've gained a lot of respect for Carroll Shelby and what he set out to achieve with his Cobra race car design. And as a result, I'm replacing the 5.0 in the car with another Ford small block Windsor. You're probably asking yourself, why on earth would this guy replace a Gen 1 small block Ford with another one when there are so many better options out there? Stay tuned and I'll explain. The 1960s and 70s was the golden age of car design and development, mostly because there were very few laws and safety regulations constraining car design. Because of this, some of the greatest cars of all time rolled off production lines all around the world, as style and innovation primarily drove the industry. Unsurprisingly, it was also a golden age of race car development. Modern race sanctioning bodies were in their infancy, and it seemed anything was possible when designing a car to go fast, because race car parity and driver safety was not a high priority. That being said, vintage race cars from this time period are unequaled in their level of ingenuity, as bold and often unconventional design concepts found their way onto the racetrack. One of these bold and unconventional race cars was none other than the AC Shelby Cobra, and it would go on to become one of the greatest race cars of all time. The Cobra was a purpose-built race car, and one of the most important decisions Shelby made was to put a 90-degree Ford V8 in the AC Ace's lightweight, short wheelbase chassis. This essentially overpowered the car while retaining its nimble handling characteristics, which was the foundation of what turned out to be a highly successful race car. This is best illustrated by comparing the Cobra's performance to its primary competition at the time, which was the Chevrolet C2 Corvette. The C2 was also powered by a 90-degree V8, and while engine displacement and rated output was similar, the Cobra weighed considerably less, giving it a power-to-weight ratio advantage. Another advantage to using a Ford V8 in the Cobra was that it was a mass-produced pushrod engine, and by nature, it had some degree of reliability built into its design because of its broad usage. This contrasts some competing race car designs of the era, many of which used one-off engine designs that were often untested and unreliable. Take for instance the Ferrari P330 P3. There's no denying that this was an iconic competitive race car, and it brought innovations like fuel injection and dual spark ignition to the racetrack. However, given the limited production and testing of some of its engines, Ferrari often learned from failings at the racetrack, whereas Shelby, well, he was using an engine platform in the Cobra that was already proven, and it had been in production since 1961. The 289 AC Cobra would go on to school C2 Corvettes wherever it raced, and it went from being a discontinued British two-seat roadster to an iconic American race car which doubled as a sports car in Ford dealerships across America. It's undeniable that the legacy of the Cobra is largely intertwined with Ford Motor Company and the small block Windsor which powered it. As I've said in some other videos, I'm not against putting other power plants in a replica. There's a lot of smart, creative car builders out there that have put together some really unique powertrain configurations, which make their replicas one of a kind. And I do love running into these at car shows and seeing how people think outside the box. However, for me, out of respect for the car's race heritage and what Carroll Shelby set out to do with this car, and how much and how perfect I think the car currently is with the small block Ford in it, I'm choosing to replace the existing motor with another 306 small block Ford. So the current motor I have in the car I got out of a 2001 Mercury Mountaineer, and in spite of some humble beginnings, the motor's perfect. Power delivery is perfect, it's reliable, I can rev it to 6,000 RPM, it has no issues at all. So you're probably asking yourself, why am I building a new motor for this car? I'm going to give you 2 reasons. So first, like many car enthusiasts, I love working on and fixing my cars, as evidenced by this YouTube channel. I'm an engineer by trade, and I find great enjoyment learning about engines and then making changes to improve them or curtail their performance to what I'm going to be using them for. And the second reason is I want the engine I'm rebuilding to have a similar period correct configuration to the 289 small block Ford used on the original Shelby Cobra, because in my eyes, this is and really was a perfect powertrain configuration for the car. And again, out of great respect for Carroll Shelby and what he set out to achieve, I want the final product to match an original 1965 289 Mark III. This video is going to be the first in a series of me rebuilding a 306 Windsor small block to capture the appropriate configuration and character of the original 289 small block Ford found in most Cobras. The rebuild methods I'm using for this engine have been the same for almost 60 years, as the core short block architecture is largely unchanged since 1962. And starting things off here is me rebuilding the core short block. So I got this motor out of an 89 5.0 Mustang, and the primary difference between a 302 and a 289 is the stroke. And that's really the only difference. Other than that, the engine architecture, it's very similar. And when I say 306 cubic inches, it's just a 302 bored 30 over, so I have a little extra displacement. However, when it comes to the intake and the exhaust and the heads, that's where I plan to deviate from the existing engine I have on the car and consider adding period correct parts, like for instance a Weber intake, maybe change the cylinder heads, etc. And that's where I can use some help from the Cobra experts out there. Specifically, what should this final engine have on it or in it to match a small block Ford 289 configuration that was found in most original Cobras? Please don't hesitate to leave me a comment. I know there's a lot of tribal knowledge out there too, from vintage racers that are still around. Let me know what you think. I'd love to hear your feedback. One area I'm not looking forward to changing from the existing setup is the existing serpentine belt system I have on the car. So I machined a lot of custom parts to make this work right, and serpentine belts obviously weren't commonplace in the 60s either. And the added benefit to this setup is you get power steering, because you need an extra pulley for reverse water flow water pumps that the 5.0s have. But if it has to go, it has to go. I also want power delivery to be similar to the 289 small block Ford found in original Cobras. And that said, if I go Weber's, I'm definitely going to be considering a different camshaft. I'm pretty sure the 289 Cobra was a rev monster, and my current motor, it's not a rev monster. It's got actually a TrickFlow TFS1 cam, which is a 221-225 intake exhaust duration. And I'll be honest, it's perfect for the street. There's not a better camshaft you can put in a street motor than this cam. But for this build, I'm definitely more willing to go radical on the cam grind. So if you know the original spec, let me know. I'm guessing Shelby probably used a few different cam grinds based on what the car was going to be used for. Meaning some of these cars were purpose-built race cars. The buyers were going to take them to the track, while others, were the sports cars driven on the street. And I am not going flat tappet cam. As period as correct as that might be, that's just not a road I'm going to go down, because I want this motor to last, and you can't even get high zinc oils anymore either. So back to the Cobra and the iconic nature it built at the racetrack. So obviously, the Cobra was raced in engine displacement classes, which limited how big the engine could be. And as the saying goes, there is no replacement for displacement. And with the Cobra, there's the enduring focus on the 427 Super Snake. That's the one everyone wants to talk about. While this engine car combo draws crowds at the car show, it was not in any way balanced with the 2,000 pound AC Ace chassis, because it was so hard to put the power down and it handled poorly too, especially in like a circuit track setting. Ken Miles once called the 390 FE Cobra the turd, which was the same base engine architecture as the 427. For the very same reason. It was just difficult to keep on the racetrack. It took a whole new race car to utilize the 427's full power potential, i.e. the GT40, because in a Cobra, this extra power, it was really only useful at the drag strip or stoplight to stoplight. So while a 427 Cobra is undeniably cool, displacement wasn't what made the Cobra special at the racetrack. It was a total package balanced around the 289's power delivery. And the same goes for other race cars of the era. Most of these were purpose built around a set displacement and power delivery because of the classes they were raced in. I can't imagine making extensive engine modifications to a class-specific race car, like a vintage Porsche or Maserati. Mostly because these cars, they are one of a kind, and they border on being works of art. Sure, they're under 200 horsepower, and they're probably temperamental too, but if I were lucky enough to own one of these, I wouldn't have it any other way. Even though I'm locked and loaded with a period correct engine displacement for my short block, there is an elephant in the room I should touch on regarding Ford's small block rebuilds. When it comes to the rotating assembly, there is this enduring focus in the car builder community that when you're rebuilding a small block Ford, you should always be looking at stroker kits because of all the big power improvements you can get by adding extra cubic inches. I'm going to give you a few reasons why I'm choosing not to put a stroker kit in this engine. So first, stroker small block Windsor has some pretty extreme rod angles and rod ratios, and when you add shorter pistons, it puts a lot of stress on the rotating assembly that you wouldn't see in an OEM setup, and that can lead to accelerated wear. This has always been a debate topic in the forums. How long is a 347 going to last, or am I going to have issues putting a stroker in a 5.0 Windsor? And I think the answer is largely no. They've worked out a lot of the bugs that they've had with these aftermarket kits. But it's still safe to say that a mild 5.0 is probably going to last longer on the street than a 347. Another issue with the stroker kit in one of these motors is the block just isn't built to handle it. So when you get above about 500 horsepower in a late model 5.0 block, which is I think after 86 or the roller blocks, they're prone to splitting right down the lifter valley. So the block itself, it was not designed in a way where it could handle that much internal stress and not have an issue. It's also worth noting that when you think of a stroker, you should think primarily of the performance improvement with torque versus horsepower, because by nature a longer stroke translates directly to more torque, and then horsepower sort of along for the ride. And in a 2,200 pound race car like the Cobra, you don't need the torque. In fact, you want the horsepower you get from a high revving motor. And coming full circle, that's why a 289 is a perfect fit for this car. While we're on the topic of race motors and typically how you want them to be able to rev and make horsepower, I'm going to tell you about the weak point of this motor, and it's the weak point of every small block Ford you're going to find, or not everyone, most of them. And that's that it has 5/16 inch connecting rod bolts. The reason this is a weak point is the higher you rev the engine, the more stress that the rod bolts see. And when you rev above, say 5,500 RPM, you're beyond the design envelope that those rod bolts were ever made to be in. The right thing to do is to replace these with 3/8 inch rod bolts, which can handle the higher loads the rod cap sees at high RPM. But because my rods were in spec and I don't plan on racing the motor, the OEM bolts should be just fine. Similarly, I replaced the OEM pistons with a modern hyper eutectic alloy piston, which allows for tighter piston to cylinder wall clearances. So while these pistons aren't as strong as say a forged piston, I'm not running boost or nitrous either. All in all, I think this short block in its final form will safely handle right around 400 horsepower. And when I say safely, guys, I know we can go higher than that, 500, 600, whatever. What I mean is it's gonna last. I can have fun with it, and as long as I don't rev it to 7,000 RPM and I change the oil frequently, this should go a long time. So coming full circle here, I'm really excited to see where this short block is gonna go. I've really had a lot of fun building it up to this point. And looking forward, that's where I can really use some help and guidance on what does the top of this motor look like, the long block, to make it authentic to the 289 hypo that was found in these cars in 1965. And as for my replica itself, I've already kind of alluded to this. I absolutely love the car. It's perfect. It's a driver's car. So again, the replica was made by Factory 5, and they did a fantastic job designing this car. It's very well rounded. It handles well. On a Saturday morning, it cannot be beat when going out on a coffee run. And in large part, that's why I'm rebuilding an engine for this car, is how much I love it and how much it resembles just the perfect combination of sports car meeting a street and the vision that Carroll Shelby had for what the car was meant to be. Make sure you like and subscribe, as this is just part 1 of the engine build and there's more to come. I also welcome all your feedback, good, bad, indifferent, because I want the final product to be right, and that's where I can use your help. Okay, well that's all I have for today, so why don't you leave me a comment, let me know what you think, and thanks for watching.